coming up.
And I have to say, Mr. Stronach, you're a businessman, you're very well known, successful businessman, but as a farmer, I take offense to that. And I'm sure a lot of farmers that are watching this right now take offense to you calling us industrial farmers. We're business people as well, Mr. Stronach, and we're trying to make a living at farming. And
I went to one of my constituents on the weekend, a ranch near Kananaskis country, and a couple of quarter sections. And Mr. Stronach, you'll be happy to know that we saw a couple black bears, a couple bald eagles, and but what was frustrating with this ranch owner as we were riding horses throughout to his property is his feed bill for his animals went up $1,000 in one delivery.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Today we have, as part of the second panel, Frank Stronach, who is the founder of Magna International and founder and chairman of Stronach International. But I think he's going to talk farming and the good work he's doing in that space as well. Oh, you're just on mute, sir.
A garage and built up a company of over 170,000 employees. 12 years ago, I decided I will get out of the big car business and go into agriculture. The more I got into the agriculture, I saw this huge chemical jungle. We know approximately 95% of the food eaten comes from industrial farms. On industrial farms, you see no more eagles fly, for the simple reason there are no more rabbits, no more pheasants. We kill everything. The pesticides, fungicides, herbicides gets in the air, we breathe the air. Gets into the water, we drink the water, gets into the soil and we eat the food grown in the soil. Family farms were always the backbone of Canada. A country which could feed themselves never had a problem, but family farms are practically on welfare. The children of family farmers say, Mom, Dad, I don't want to be in a farming. I don't want to be on welfare. There are so many indications and statistics that practically all the kids have allergies. The enormous rise of stage 2 diabetics and autism is on the rise. Most well-to-do families feed their kids organic foods. But I believe in a Canada where every kid has an equal chance to grow up healthy. That is not the case anymore under the circumstances. So my recommendations are, no Canadian kid should go to school hungry. That means breakfast has to be served. No Canadian kid should leave the school hungry. And the law would state that the food served in schools would have to be organic. I do believe that if people make statements, we cannot afford to feed organic food to our children, that would be a very poor statement, because the medical cost, savings would outweigh the cost of producing organic foods. I believe Canada should take a closer look. How can family farms survive? They could survive and do well if Canada has a special program to support family farmers which grow organic foods. I hope the Minister of Agriculture takes a serious look at my recommendations. The subject is very dear to my heart. It is important that all Canadian kids have a chance to grow up healthy and happy. I would make myself available to go into more details on how to grow healthy foods for Canadians. Thank you.
Mr. Stronach, in your opening remarks, you referred to farms as industrial farms, organic farm versus organic farms, and the traditional farms as industrial farms. And I have to say, Mr. Stronach, you're a businessman, you're very well known, successful businessman, but as a farmer, I take offense to that. And I'm sure a lot of farmers that are watching this right now take offense to you calling us industrial farmers. We're business people as well, Mr. Stronach, and we're trying to make a living at farming. And we heard from witnesses in the previous panel how difficult it can be to make a living. And so I just want to set the record straight that family farms work very hard in this country, and many of us are incorporated because of various reasons to make a good business model. And we work very hard to produce the best food for Canadians using the least amount of chemicals, using the least amount of inputs as possible. And so I just want to correct the record on that. And sir, you're known for having a strong commitment to the environment and to conservation and sustainability. And we've seen this government has proposed regulations banning plastic food packaging. And we've heard of a Deloitte report that says that food waste and spoilage will increase drastically, actually by 50%, and it will increase greenhouse gas emissions by 50% from food wasted. I'm just wondering if you can comment on if this is a good business decision coming from the government.
First of all, I like to say the last thing I want to do is to criticize farmers, because I think to provide food is the most noble profession I think people can do. When I refer to industrial farms, I refer, farms which are quite a few hundred acres or a few thousand acres, where you do single crops, or where you haven't got a lot of variety, right? And nature can take care of itself if you leave it reasonable alone. But still, the fact is, when you have large farms, where you got maybe 500 acres of corn or soya, whatever, a lot of chemicals are used, fungicide, pesticides, etc., and the plain fact is, on those farms, you don't see no more eagles fly. Why? Because we poison everything. So that's the problem. And again, practically every kid has allergies. A great percentage of kids have the rise in diabetic stage 2 and autism, right? I mean, we got to wake up. We use too many chemicals to produce foods, so we got to wake up.
Well, Mr. Stronach, I can tell you from my experience and all of the farms I've traveled to across this country, I saw eagles fly over the farms in British Columbia when I was out there a couple weeks ago. I see lots of wildlife, and I disagree with that statement. My family used to farm over 1,000 acres of potatoes, and many farms are big, and they're family farms. They're owned by families, and the truth of the matter is they have to have large farms in order to succeed in this industry in Canada. It's very hard to compete as a small farm anymore. So, Mr. Stronach, we've seen around the world that experiments that have happened, and I'm going to turn over to Mr. Mussel for a moment. We've seen what's happened in Sri Lanka when we talk about organic farming, and when you take away all of the pesticides and the inability to actually produce food. So, Mr. Mussel, I'm just wondering if you would comment on that and what we've seen in Sri Lanka, and should we legislate organic food for kids in school?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question. I don't think we have the luxury to legislate organic foods. There's I think a number of concerns there, but the biggest one, you started your question off with Sri Lanka. What occurred in Sri Lanka was essentially the agricultural system fell apart when they stopped using fertilizer and at least certain pesticides. Look. We have to make prudent use of fertilizer and pesticides. This is to be taken as a serious matter, but we can't simply do without. And I would direct you to some of the research done at the University of Manitoba, in which we found that 40% globally of the adequate diet based on protein can be directly mapped back through to the Haber-Bosch process that produces artificial nitrogen. So look, there's a certain group of people who can afford organic food. These are personal choices, and I don't advise people on personal choices. However, the idea that this is a widespread solution, I believe, is incorrect in my understanding of it.
I'd like to make a few comments on that. I like to see a Canada where every kid has the same chance to grow up healthy. And when you look back 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, there were hardly any people hardly had any allergies. Okay, so we started to use so many chemicals that all the kids are practically sick. And yes, you still see eagles flies in the mountains and where there's no farming. Of course you see eagles fly, right? But industrial farms where you farm single crops in large quantities, you don't, there's no more rabbits there.
Mr.
Mr.
Stronach?
Stronach, I would love to invite you to come to my farm or to any farm in my riding of Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, where you can see the wildlife, the plethora of wildlife that lives in the area amongst all of the agriculture that takes place
Ms.
there.
Rood. We're at time. Thank you, Mr.
I know that you've put a lot of time and effort into the foundation, GUHA, that you started to ensure that children do have access to healthy food, and I'm proud that our government has introduced a national school food policy. Could you explain a little bit when you're talking about industrial farms, what it is about those farms that you feel are problematic for childhood health, and why you think organics would be better for children?
Well, first of all, in industrial farms or large farms, a lot of chemicals are used, fungicide, pesticide, etc., etc. Those are known facts. And everybody, every chef or most people, on foods where a lot of chemicals were used, they're not as healthy than organic food. And organic food, you cannot grow in huge, large. You need greater varieties of crops, and nature will take care of itself. So anybody again saying, "Look, we cannot afford organic food for kids," I think that's a very bad statement, because the medical costs are huge compared to what we would have to maybe spend on extra time for organic food. So I think the future generation will not look too greatly on the people now, which use a lot of chemicals in grown foods.
Thank you, Mr. Stronach. And I know that you are in the farming business, that you have an organic farm. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what the government can do to help with the transition, because we know we can't just cut off all fertilizers or pesticides, but that there is a transition, like in the oil and gas sector, where we have to transition to renewable sources of energy. And we heard earlier from the founder of a company called Sustain that are working on more organic fertilizers from food waste, actually. And we know there's a lot of approaches to controlling pests through natural mechanisms. So what do you think the government can do to provide leadership or to help make the transition from using more harmful chemicals to using more natural organic methods?
I said early on, a country which could feed its people. Family farmers were always the backbone of Canada, and they could feed the Canadians, right? So it's very important. But right now, family farms cannot compete with industrial farms. And thereby, I think we could have set up a family trust fund, and whereby family farms, if they farm organic, they will get a subsidy. It's quite simple. I think we should have a great concern. I mean, the sicknesses which go, the rise of stage 2 diabetics is enormous, and autism. When you read most medical books, you could see what the problems are. So to say we cannot afford, that's the wrong statement. Because we should do everything we can that our kids have a chance to grow up healthy. And 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, they grew up healthy in Canada. Why can't we do that now? Yes, there's more people living now, but we could utilize more farmland and grow organic food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks for our witnesses for being here. Before I go to my questions, colleagues, I did move or put a notice of motion on April 9th, and I would like to move that motion now. And why this is coming today, is I went to one of my constituents on the weekend, a ranch near Kananaskis country, and a couple of quarter sections. And Mr. Stronach, you'll be happy to know that we saw a couple black bears, a couple bald eagles, and but what was frustrating with this ranch owner as we were riding horses throughout to his property is his feed bill for his animals went up $1,000 in one delivery, and that $1,000 was completely as a result of the carbon tax on the trucking. So we like to highlight the fact that this carbon tax is having a detrimental impact on Canadian agriculture and their ability to stay in business. And this is a family rancher who's Dewey is looking forward to passing on this family ranch onto his grandson and granddaughter here in the next few years, and questioning their financial viability to be able to do that with the impact the carbon tax is having on their operation. So on April 9th, I put forward a notice of motion that I'd like to move now. That over the last few weeks, we received a number of letters from dozens of stakeholder groups representing thousands of farmers, tens of thousands of farmers, and certainly tens of thousands of hectares of arable farmland, highlighting the impact the carbon tax is having on their operations. And certainly through this study, just alone that we've heard, 44% of produce growers are operating at a loss, which certainly isn't a long-term, not long-term viability for their operations. So I asked my colleagues on April 9th if for unanimous consent for the committee to report those letters that we've received from a number of provincial agriculture ministers, agriculture stakeholder groups like the Association of Rural Municipalities in Saskatchewan, Grain Farmers of Ontario, and a number of others, asking for the government to review its decision to increase the carbon tax 23% on April 1st and take a look at the impact that this is having on Canadian agriculture as part of the consideration for the debate on Bill C-234, which is coming back later this month. So I'm asking my colleagues for unanimous consent to table those letters in the House as part of the discussion on Bill C-234.
234 has come before this committee before. We've dealt with it. It's been sent back to the House, the other chamber, and it came back. So I don't see what more we could add to this particular debate. We know, and I've seen all the letters; they're public. So I don't see what value it would add to the House of Commons. I think most parliamentarians have seen those letters as well. They are in the public domain.
I think just for simplicity's sake, I mean, there's a lot of preamble here, which I believe is unnecessary. So I would suggest just a friendly amendment to my colleague, Mr. Barlow, and just simplify the motion. And it's just simply that the committee report the letters it received from agriculture stakeholders, the Ontario Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities regarding the 23% carbon tax increase on April 1st to the House for its consideration and debate on C-234. So just a simple, to-the-point motion. But I mean, I'm okay with having a vote on this, but I think it's important to understand what this would result in procedurally in the House. I've never been on a committee where we've just simply reported letters to the House.
So what we can do, colleagues, is I can ask for some procedural help from the clerk about the mechanism which Mr. Barlow is talking about. I take notice, Mr. McGregor, you've just moved an amendment, offered an amendment to Mr. Barlow's motion to simplify it. But if you would like, we can come back to this once I get some guidance from the clerk. Go ahead, Monsieur Parent. Allez-y.
Je vais faire juste un bref commentaire.
Just a brief comment. I agree with what Mr. Drouin said. With all due respect to Mr. Barlow, it's in the hands of the House. It's being handled. The letters are public, so I don't see what this will add. I will be ready to vote on this. Thank you.
So what we can do is, well, the committee members, if they are ready to vote, and we do want to move to a vote, which Monsieur Parent said he would. Mr. Barlow has asked. If we want, colleagues, we can vote on what Mr. McGregor has just moved, which is an amendment, up or down on that, and then we can choose up or down on what Mr. Barlow's seeking to do procedurally. Is that how you would like to proceed? Okay. Go ahead, Madam Clerk, if you could, on the amendment that Mr. Barlow moved, Mr. McGregor moved on Mr. Barlow's original motion. So, colleagues, essentially what Mr. McGregor his amendment would do is he keeps given that, and then A, that would stay, and then he goes immediately down to the bottom of the piece and goes regarding the 23% carbon tax increase on April 1st to the House for its consideration in debate on Bill C-234. That's what I had. Go ahead, Mr. McGregor, if we're wrong.
It's just a simple motion that the committee report the letters. So I'm removing the entire preamble. I'm removing the ask for unanimous consent. It's just a motion that the committee report the letters, and then it stays the same on the bottom end.
Okay, I'm going to read this to you, colleagues. We're back. That the committee report the letters it received from agricultural stakeholders, the Ontario Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities regarding the 23% carbon tax increase on April 1st to the House for its consideration in debate on Bill C-234. So that is what Mr. McGregor has moved. We're going to proceed to a recorded vote. On the amendment, go ahead.
Monsieur Drouin.
No.
Monsieur Cheng.
No.
Monsieur Lewis.
No.
Monsieur MacDonald. Madame Tetterroy.
No.
Monsieur Barlow.
Yeah.
Monsieur Lew.
Oui.
Madame Rood.
Oui.
Monsieur Epp.
Oui.
Monsieur Perron.
Non.
Monsieur McGregor. Monsieur McGregor.
Yes.
Ultimately, the motion has, the amended motion has failed, so we can go back to the main motion. We can repeat this if you want, colleagues, or if you think it's going to be a similar voting pattern, we can just move on. How would you like to? Record a vote, Mr. Barlow, or not? Okay, go ahead again.
Monsieur Drouin.
No.
Monsieur Cheng.
No.
Monsieur Lewis.
No.
Monsieur MacDonald. Madame Tetterroy.
No.
Monsieur Barlow.
Yes.
Monsieur Lew.
Oui.
Madame Rood.
Yes.
Monsieur Epp.
Yes.
Monsieur Perron.
No.
Monsieur McGregor.
Gentlemen, and give up your 2 minutes.
I abstain.
Going to, so the motion is defeated, Mr. Barlow. You have 2 minutes left in your time.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Dr. Mussel, you were talking about the issue in Sri Lanka, and I just wanted to highlight the fact on that when Sri Lanka went 100% organic, they had famine, and as you said, the agriculture industry collapsed, which we are also seeing in the EU as they force 25% organic there. I think there's a place for everything, but we can't force it. But I understand, Dr. Mussel, that you've been working on policies that are maybe not, carbon tax is a punishing policy. Let's look at things that reward farmers for some of the things they're doing rather than punishing them. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the policy ideas that the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute would be looking at that would be more of a carrot rather than a stick?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much for the question. Yeah, we look for opportunities in which agriculture can be a solutions provider. As one of the only a few industries that is capable of sequestering carbon, we look at that as an option, and what options there are to provide incentives for that. As we get into this. A lot of the discussion has been around mitigation, and mitigation is very important, climate change mitigation and what different industries can provide. I do think there is a point in which agriculture is somewhat unique because agriculture, as some of the other witnesses have mentioned, is extremely sensitive to climate and climate extremes. So when we think about resilience, a lot of resilience in this environment, I think, is about adaptation and how we prepare the sector for what it may need to contend with. And I think a pretty aggressive research and development agenda that would pursue that type of resilience around adaptation and look for opportunities for mitigation within that. But it strikes me as pretty clear that adaptation is the most critical and acute need.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And I just wanted to say something to Mr. Stronach, because I failed to say it in my last session, and that is just to thank you, because there are numerous people at your stage and age, Mr. Stronach, with your success, would not be this passionate about the kind of vision that you have for our country. And I want to thank you for caring deeply about our environment, future generations, and our country. And just to say that, we need more people with vision and that see that the way things are not the way things have to be. Helen Keller said the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. And so thank you for your vision and for what you've done for our country.